The U.S. Catholic bishops held their fall meeting in Baltimore this week, voting to approve their highly anticipated teaching document on the Eucharist. Does it address the issue of communion for politicians advocating abortion rights? Editor of Catholic World News, Philip LAWLER, and Bishop Thomas PAPROCKI of Springfield are here to weigh in. President of the Catholic League, Dr. Bill DONOHUE, discusses his new book, The Truth about Clergy Sexual Abuse. And New Jersey Congressman Chris Smith will talk to us about the Biden administration's $2 trillion spending bill. The world over begins right now.
Now, Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. We have an important show for you tonight. If you'd like to comment, send me a tweet. I'm at Raymond Arroyo. Lots to cover this evening. During their full meeting this week in Baltimore, the U.S. Catholic bishops approved that much anticipated and controversial document on the Eucharist, now titled The Mystery of the Eucharist in the Life of the Church. What does it contain, and how might it be used? Joining me to discuss is editor of Catholic World News, Phil LAWLER. Phil, for a document that has caused such a stir at the last USCCB meeting in June, before a draft was even written, there was almost no public debate or discussion at this meeting about this document. Most of what occurred happened in executive session. Why do you think that was?
I think the bishops put a very high priority on preserving a facade of unity, and I insist on calling it a facade because they are not united on this, as they've proven throughout the last year. We've had a lot of debates and sort of sniping at each other, but once they got together, they put a very high premium on giving people the impression that there was an agreement, which in fact is not there.
What did you make of the fact that prior to any agreement, even the draft, you had the Vatican publishing an interview with Cardinal Roger Mahoney, one of the most scandal-ridden and tragic figures in the last 50 years in Catholicism, using him as almost a benchmark of what the bishops should be using in their approach to these politicians who dissent from church teaching and yet want to go receive the Eucharist. What did you make of that?
I thought that was absolutely stunning when I saw on the Vatican News site an interview with Cardinal Mahoney. Why would you think of Cardinal Mahoney? I mean, to be honest with you, I had almost forgotten him myself, happily. And then suddenly he's raised out of his retirement, out of his more or less forced retirement, to be given a platform by the Vatican to make a statement which itself was truly extraordinary, in that he congratulated the Democratic lawmakers who had issued a statement saying, in effect, that they were going to go ahead with their promotion of abortion irrespective of what the Catholic Church teaches. So there's two quick strikes. First, why this particular prelate is given the platform, and second, why, when he's given the platform, he applauds the people at whom this document should have been aimed. And then, of course, the third strike, the Vatican chose to put this out on the eve of the bishops' meeting. To me, it seemed a very clear indication that the people who took that line, took the line that Cardinal Mahoney took, that Cardinal Cupich is taking, that they have the backing of Rome.
Yeah, no, they clearly wanted to queer the deal here, and the approach that and the movement that was already forward moving here. And as far as we're talking about Mahoney, and as long as we're talking about him, he's all for reserving penalties against these dissenting Catholic politicians. But the moment a little nun dared to critique his very flawed document on the Eucharist 20-something years ago, he wanted to cut her head off and remove her vocation, as I recall. So I'll leave that on the table.
People can very well, yes.
Yeah, I do too. I think I might have even written something about it. While their document fails, Phil, to address dissenting politicians, the bishop's proposed Eucharistic Revival begins in June of 2022. It culminates with a national congress. I want to play a piece of the PSA that they ran for this upcoming event. Roll that.
And that is just a snapshot of what Congress attendees will see and experience in Indy.
So it ends. The National Conference, Eucharistic Congress, will be in Indianapolis. What do you make of this Eucharistic Revival?
I think the idea of a Eucharistic revival is a fine one. There's no question that there's a need to revive reverence for the Eucharist, to revive reverence in the liturgy. We just had a poll come out this past week, I think, that was showing once again a minority of Catholics, even active Catholics, believe what the church teaches, that the Eucharist is the real presence of Jesus Christ, body and blood, soul and divinity. We need a revival because this is as fundamental a truth as there is in the Catholic faith, and it's widely neglected. I think, because of sloppy catechesis. So the revival is fine. The problem is that this was taken up as a sort of side route to get us off the path of a clear statement about the importance of Eucharistic coherence. And the idea of Eucharistic coherence is a part of what we need in terms of reverence for the Eucharist.
If you're going to have a revival,
You can't approach the Eucharist, you can't claim you're in communion if in fact you dispute and reject the teachings of the Catholic Church.
Bishop Michael Duca of Baton Rouge suggested that the marketing for this Eucharistic Congress should invite people to participate in the Eucharist and what it provides and not what Indianapolis provides. That this Eucharistic Revival also does not come cheaply. Archbishop Timothy Broglio of the Military Services had this to say.
The $28 million price tag on this gathering, I think, might appear to be a bit scandalous if you think about all of the other things that the church needs and asks money for. I'm just thinking of our schools. That's my budget for 4 years for the Archdiocese, and I would imagine in many other smaller dioceses that probably represents even much more. I'm just wondering how we market this $28 million price tag.
How do you market it, Phil?
It's outrageous, but then this is the sort of gesture that our bishops have come to favor, to make a grand gesture, a sweeping thing, a media hit that will employ a lot of people, give a lot of people opportunities to shine, when the message that they want to drive home or should want to drive home could be sent out loud and clear by any bishop who says, I cannot accept the profanation of the Eucharist, I can't accept sacrilege, I'm going to take action. It's really action that we need. We're past words.
Well, you know, here in New Orleans, we had Archbishop Rummel, who excommunicated people for opposing the segregation of schools, or opposing the integration of schools, rather. And he totally excommunicated these people who were public figures, adamantly opposed, and they were acting on racist biases and sentiments. If you don't take a firm and even unpopular stand, it seems to me, on the Eucharist, Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi are teaching what it means to be Catholic. So much for your Eucharistic revival. I mean, we have to recall this whole Eucharistic document arose from concerns about the discordance of a Catholic president teaching what it means to be Catholic in opposition to his own bishops. Did Biden win this round with the bishops, Phil?
Biden won this round, and Biden is going to keep winning rounds as long as the bishops refused or back away, back down, and don't make a very clear statement. You know, the problem with a statement is a lot of good Catholics are going to come away from it saying, oh, the bishops made a strong statement about how about the great gift of the Eucharist and the need for reverence in the Eucharist. But what everybody was asking, the question that everybody was asking, they ducked. And what comes out of this is a situation in which people feel free to do what Biden does, to do what so many people do, to ignore the teachings of the church and continue to march up for communion. It's almost an invitation to disobedience. And for that reason, I think, contrary to what some of my friends are saying, I think that this statement is worse than nothing.
Wow. Okay, I want to move on and ask you about something before I let you go. This past weekend, in an interview with a television channel in Switzerland, Archbishop Arthur Roche, he is the prefect of liturgy at the Vatican, he addressed the Pope's motu proprio, guardians of tradition, which limits the use of the traditional Latin Mass. Roche said, quote, "The normal form of the celebration of the Roman Rite is found in those documents that have been published since the Second Vatican Council. Pope John Paul II's Ecclesia Dei and Benedict XVI's Summorum Pontificum were established in order to encourage the Lefebvrists, above all, to return to unity with the Church. It's clear that Traditionis Custodes is saying, okay, this experiment has not entirely been successful, and so let us go back to what the Second Vatican Council required of the Church." Your thoughts here, Phil, and what do you make of the assertion that Benedict wrote Summorum Pontificum to encourage Lefebvrists to return to the Church?
Well, he didn't, and my authority for that is the man who wrote the document. He said he did not write it simply to encourage the Lefebvrists to come back. He wrote it to make an opening for a revival of the liturgy. Once again, we're talking about reverence for the Eucharist in the liturgy. And he was fairly forthright about that. You know, there's a lack of continuity here, or a break of continuity, because if Pope Benedict XVI was writing for one purpose and made it very explicit, and now you say that wasn't his purpose, well, the next Pope can turn around and say he has another purpose for this. And along the same lines, if you say that the Novus Ordo liturgy, the liturgy that's ordinarily celebrated in our churches today, if you say that it is in context with, in continuity with the old form, that what we now call the extraordinary form, how can you say then that the extraordinary form isn't in continuity with what we're celebrating now? There's just a lack of logic and a lack of consistency there.
Yeah, well, this rupture, as you said, it's a breaking, and it's never a good thing. And it occurred to me as I read that statement, the progression of the Vatican II liturgy moves through John Paul II and Benedict's papacies. So you saw the maturation of that. That is the liturgy of Vatican II. Now we're having some imaginary flashback to 1965 or 67 and trying to call that the Mass of Vatican II. It's a very curious construction, and as you said, strains logic and the words of the man himself, Benedict, who's still with us. I'll give you the last word.
You're right. And I just add as a last word, I would be happy with the liturgy that was the liturgical guidelines that were given to us by the Second Vatican Council. That's not what we have. The attempted reform of the liturgy that the council called for was hijacked. And what we've got now is something very different from what the council actually wanted.
I agree with you. I encourage people to go read those documents. You'll see. You'd be shocked. You can also read Phil Lawler's commentary at CatholicCulture.org. Phil, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Joining me now to share his insights on the USCCB fall meeting is Bishop Thomas PAPROCKI of Springfield, Illinois. Thank you for being here. He joins us from Baltimore. Your Excellency, I want to start with the document on Eucharistic Coherence. We've been talking about it really for weeks now, if not months. Last summer, there were some bishops who feared the document might be used to rebuke Catholic politicians who are in favor of abortion rights. Now there's an already existing document on the Eucharist that the USCCB wrote in 2006, and there's canon law both clearly state who is and who is not to receive communion. What does this new document provide that the bishops and the Catholic faithful didn't get from the previous iterations?
I think this new document complements what we've said before in 2006 and also what is contained in Canons 915 and 916 about who should receive Holy Communion. I think it's important to correct a misconception. This document was never intended to be primarily about politicians receiving Holy Communion. Right. It was intended really to be to give an understanding of the Eucharist. From what the polls tell us, many Catholics don't understand or don't believe what the Church teaches about the real presence of our Lord in the Eucharist. So there's a lot in there about that. But there are sections in here that do talk about the issues that are sinful, that could affect someone's eligibility to receive Holy Communion. We quote Pope Francis, who talks about the throwaway culture and specifically names the unborn who are unwanted and the elderly who also tend to be unwanted in many cases. And then we do talk specifically with references to those documents from 2006 and Canon 915 and 916. So it's important to understand that the Bishops' Conference, for one, doesn't have any authority to say who can or cannot receive Holy Communion. That really depends on the individual bishop in his diocese.
The bishops overwhelmingly voted to accept the document, 222 in favor, 8 against, with 3 abstentions. Hardly any bishops commented on the document, however, at least during the public portion of the conversation and debate. However, Bishop Joseph Strickland of the Diocese of Tyler, Texas, did have something to say.
The scandal factor is quite significant, and to really address that more than just mentioning it, I believe is very beneficial to the faithful and to helping really promote this beautiful document on the Eucharist and really emphasizing the beauty of the real presence of the Lord among us in the Eucharist. So I just ask for further consideration or reconsideration of that number 16 regarding scandal.
Why wasn't there more debate, Your Excellency, on the document in public, particularly since at least part of what informed this conversation was public confusion and scandal caused by prominent Catholic politicians?
Well, I think we had a very contentious meeting in June when we were first discussing whether or not even to draft this document. And I think there was a sense among many bishops that we wanted to avoid being so contentious about this. I also give a lot of credit to Bishop Kevin Rhodes, the Bishop of South Bend, Fort Wayne, Indiana, who was the chairman of our Committee on Doctrine. I think he did a lot of work behind the scenes and worked very quietly, talking to bishops and working with them to see what would be acceptable. And I think the fact that it received almost a unanimous vote is a real credit to the work of Bishop Rhodes and the committee to arrive at a consensus over something that was very contentious in the spring.
Yeah. Your Excellency, for the last 25 years, I've watched these documents come and documents go, and there's a little skirmish in the media over the debate, and then the documents fade away. But the fact is, the issue, the underlying issue here, does have effects on souls, on individuals, and certainly in your diocese. Last week, America Magazine published an interview with Senator Dick Durbin, a pro-abortion Democrat from Illinois, from your diocese, where he complained that your diocese was being, quote, unfair to him, fundamentally unfair, and singling him out by denying him communion for his pro-choice stance. Now, you and Bishop Kevin Van in California wrote a response to him this week, correcting him. You write that he's not being singled out because of his opinion. Why is he being denied communion, Your Excellency?
He's being singled out in a sense because of his actions, not his opinion. So Canon 915 talks about those who obstinately persist and manifest grave sin. So he's, through his legislative actions in the United States Senate, he is actively promoting abortion. And so that was one error that we tried to correct in our response in America Magazine. The other one is that he tries to equate other issues or equate or even say that they outweigh. So the fact that he promotes legislation to help the poor and to help migrants. I mean, those are wonderful things that our conference agrees with, but you can't say that, well, because of all these other good things I do, that we can just sort of give him a pass on the fact that he's very strongly promoting abortion. So I think it's very important to correct those kinds of mistakes.
And Bishop PAPROCKI, you have spoken directly to Durbin. You had the much discussed but seldom utilized dialogue with Senator Durbin about his views and why the communion is important, what it means. He considered it just a matter of conscience. And he said in his interview, well, if one has a conscience, and I have a Catholic conscience, that should be good enough. Why is that not correct thinking?
Well, because I think sometimes people talk about conscience in terms of rationalizing what they want to do. And the criteria for whether or not someone should be admitted to Holy Communion are very objective standards that can be observed by others. So that's important to understand, too, that a bishop is not making a determination about the status of one's soul or one's sinfulness before God. Only God judges the individual person. But it's in the situation where you have someone whose actions are considered to be externally gravely sinful, that's the criteria for which a bishop has to act. And so, that's basically what we've done here. Also, I would say, yes, I've had those conversations not only with Senator Durbin, but I'm the Bishop of Springfield, which is our state capital. I've also had those conversations with some of our state legislators. But I would also say that in terms of the dialogue, the bishops often get criticized for not dialoguing. First of all, I'd say there is more dialoguing going on than people may realize. Again, this is often quiet and behind the scenes, but I would say that, unfortunately, in my experience, it's the politicians who really don't want to dialogue. They're just very much dug into their pro-abortion stance, and there's just no give on that.
Well, that's why maintaining the status quo is in the interest of the people trying to teach in place of the bishops, frankly. And so they love things to remain as they are. Your Excellency, the bishops are planning a Eucharistic revival with 3 years of Eucharistic processions and adoration, prayer events all over the country. Now, this Eucharistic revival will culminate in Indianapolis in 2024 at the Eucharistic National Congress. Your thoughts on the plan for this Eucharistic revival?
Well, I think it's a wonderful plan. We're going to have parish-based celebrations of the Eucharist. And we'll have a diocesan Eucharistic Congress, and then there'll be this national Congress, as you mentioned, in Indianapolis in 2024. I think that this Eucharistic revival should also be seen in relation to the document that we were just talking about. Because if we're going to revive something, the question is, what are we reviving? And so we want to make sure that people have a good understanding of what is the Eucharist, and particularly with young people, that they really understand the importance, first of all, of the meaning of the Eucharist in terms of the real presence of our Lord, that we receive the body and blood of Christ in the Eucharist, but also the importance of going to Mass on Sunday. That is something that it's key to our identity as Catholics to celebrate our faith. So I'm very encouraged by this. I'm glad that so much of our conversation this week in Baltimore focused on the Eucharist, the meaning of the sacrament, and who should receive, the proper preparation to receive the sacrament. But then going forward from here to have this Eucharistic revival, which I think the timing is good, because as you mentioned earlier, sometimes we bishops work on documents and then they wind up on a shelf and don't get much attention. But the fact that we are heading into this 3-year revival means I think there's going to be a lot of attention and a lot of talking and hopefully celebration about the Eucharist in the next 3 years.
visible signs that people can see and touch and experience, that's where it's at, culturally and otherwise. So I was heartened to see that response. It's so much more. It animates the doctrine, which is what's needed, because these politicians are otherwise the only animators of a very confused version of that doctrine. Bishop Thomas PAPROCKI, thank you for your time and for your insight.
God bless you.
My next guest just released a brand new book on a topic which has really divided Catholics and caused such controversy. In it, he separates fact from fiction regarding the causes of this scandal. Here to discuss the truth about clergy sex abuse, clarifying the facts and causes, I'm joined by President of the Catholic League, Bill Donohue. Bill, thanks for being here. Bill, before we get to the new book, the U.S. Bishops' fall meeting began in Baltimore this week. USCCB President Jose Gomez has come under fire for a speech he gave earlier this month where he seemed to label so-called social justice movements as pseudo-religions. He wrote, with the breakdown of the Judeo-Christian worldview and the rise of secularism, political belief systems based on social justice or personal identity have come to fill the space that Christian belief and practice once occupied. Bill, what's your reaction to these comments?
Right. I thought his speech was absolutely brilliant. I think it was one of the most important intellectual statements in recent times. He's talking about a subject which sociologists have been talking about for about 150 years, quite frankly, which is that when the heart of the culture in our society, that would be the Judeo-Christian heritage, when it begins to wither, then there's a power vacuum. Something will take its place. And we've seen the de-Christianization of the Western world. That's what Gomez is getting at. And it's being replaced by these ersatz substitute religions, such as this critical race theory and the like, that people are clinging to. Now, it's not just Gomez who's talking this way. Columbia University professor, he's an African-American, John McWhorter, has written a book about woke racism, and that's exactly what happens. It's become a new religion. In other words, these people don't have the kind of spiritual upbringing that they once had, and they're looking now for some meaning in their life. And, you know, some people are overreacting that Gomez is trying to say that social justice is somehow not proper. The Catholic Church has a long, rich history of promoting social justice. But he's saying it's been hijacked by people who have another agenda. And I think that the critics of him are way off base. We're glad to vigorously defend him. And when they have their silly petitions organized by George Soros-funded entities like Faith in Public Life and Faithful America, you know what a game it is. Archbishop Gomez gave a great speech. He should be commended and not condemned.
Bill, let's talk about your new book, The Truth About Clergy Sex Abuse. What made you write and release this book now? I mean, you've been grappling with this, you've been reporting on this issue for 20 years.
Well, that's right. And after seeing all the lies and all the disinformation, misinformation about this subject, and having collected so much data over 20 years, I decided to put my sociological training to practice and read virtually everything that you could read on the subject. And I thought, well, you know, time has come. We have to separate the fact from the fiction. We have to deal with some forbidden areas that you're not supposed to talk about. If you put together the lies that have been told, along with the cowardice that approaches this subject, it is stunning. So I decided to marshal my resources, look at my own research on this, some of which I've written in the past, and look at whole new volumes of research. Because most of the stuff out there, they're not written by social scientists. It's mostly written by people on the left. And although there's some good works by some conservative authors on this subject, but there's nothing by a social scientist. So I decided the time has come. I'm tired of the lies that have been told.
In the preface, you write, over the past half century, the Catholic Church has experienced two scandals: the clergy sex abuse crisis, which was caused by priests and bishops, and the exploitation of it, which was caused by strident critics of the Catholic Church and those profiting from legal cases. Both have resulted in great damage to the Church. Bill, what do you mean by these two scandals, and how have they fueled one another?
Well, the first one is the one that's familiar to most people. You have two parties to the scandal within the Church, and that is to say the enabling bishops and the molesting priest. I look in the book as to why some bishops were enablers and why some priests were molesters. That's a big chunk of the book. But I also look at something I call Scandal 2, and I was encouraged by Mary Ann Glendon when she liked that line of thought that I was developing a number of years ago and encouraged me to go forward with it. I decided to do so. And there I'm talking about a different kind of scandal. The people who won't let it go. The people who are poisoning the public mind. The people who want the public to believe that nothing's ever changed, that the scandal is ongoing. The people who are profiting from it, either economically or ideologically, or in some cases both. They want us to believe that this will never end. And you do have some people on the far left and on the far right who have a vested interest in keeping the scandal alive, as well as states' attorneys generals, victims groups. Certainly Hollywood has played a major role in this development. The media for their own ratings and ideological predilections. So, yeah, that's a scandal in and of itself. We're not being told the truth about the tremendous progress that the Catholic Church has made. It's indisputable. It's not even a debatable question. And you can talk about why the problems took place in the first place and what led to some of the progress. That's all fair game. But the fact that we've made progress and all these groups don't want to mention it, that's a problem.
I want to dive into this first chapter. You begin by saying Catholics don't own this problem. Well, who does, Bill? And shouldn't the church be held to a higher standard than corporations or Hollywood or public schools?
There's no question the Catholic Church should be held to a higher standard. If a child is molested by a priest or a plumber, that child is harmed. It matters to me, certainly as a Catholic, that if it's a priest, that's even more outrageous because he has a higher calling and we expect more from them. All I'm simply saying is this. Wherever you have adults interacting with minors on a regular basis, such as in the Boy Scouts, such as in camp counselors, you see it a lot in Hollywood, clearly, obviously in the public schools. Unfortunately, you're going to see a much higher incidence of this kind of problem than most people would expect. And they're given a pass. Never mind the sexual misconduct that takes place in CBS and NBC, in the corporate world. It's ubiquitous. There's not an institution which is without this kind of problem. Google had their employees walk out in protest because of all the sexual misconduct. Now, all I'm saying is this. While we should hold the church to a higher standard, all priests are entitled to due process rights like every other person in this country. And if the media are truly concerned about the problem, namely the molestation of a minor, then it shouldn't matter who the identity is of the molester. But it does matter. When Amy Berg out of Hollywood tried to put together a movie about or documentary, I should say, about the problem of pedophilia in Hollywood, she was blocked. And it came out only in a few small cinemas at the end. When I see CNN, for example, doing these big exposés on the Catholic Church, saying not a word about any other religion, as if we own this, saying not a word about what's going on in the public schools and the like, then you realize there's an agenda. When I see the lawyers always going after the Catholic Church, nobody else, they go after the Catholic Church because they know that we're a big fat target. And we know we've been around for 2,000 years. We're hierarchical. We have a pope at the top. They think we have a lot of money. And if you can discredit the moral voice of the Catholic Church, then you're on your way to discrediting the voice of evangelicals, Orthodox Jews, Muslims, and Mormons who also share our idea of sexual ethics.
Bill, in the book, you go into great detail about the outside enablers of this scandal, this sex abuse scandal. But I want to focus for a moment on the enablers inside the church. Why were so many bishops guilty of either abuse themselves or cover-ups in this scandal?
Well, I look at several different reasons for this, and I want the viewer to understand, when I give an explanation, it's not a justification. It's just simply a sociological understanding of what's going on. Such, for example, in-group favoritism. It's natural that people who are close to others, be a spouse, could be a parent with a teenage son who got in trouble, he got drunk on a Friday night in front of a 7-Eleven, the cops bring him home. The natural instinct is to try and protect him. The bishop doesn't want to create a scandal. They didn't understand where they were going with this, but a lot of them wanted to show favoritism to the priest and say, listen, we were going to deal with this guy, Father X, but the problem is that we don't want this to get out. This kind of problem, and I've seen it in the book when I go through all these other organizations. It happened, as I say, at CBS, at NBC, all these places. Again, it's not justification, but it's natural to protect the people whom you're close to so that they won't get hurt. But they should have understood you're dealing here with crimes, not just with offenses.
You wrap up the first part of the book, Bill, by addressing what are considered popular explanations for this scandal. I want to get into a few of these explanations and why you think they're wrong very quickly. Priestly celibacy. People say, well, if they weren't celibate, they wouldn't be chasing down victims and acting out sexually. Your response?
Well, we had celibacy in the 1940s and 50s, and we didn't have this problem. And it's not like as if it was hidden. No, we didn't have this problem. Did we have priests who were inclined to be molesters? You bet we did, because almost all of the molesters were homosexuals. So we certainly had homosexual priests back in the 40s and 50s, but the culture was different. Therefore, they didn't act out. Celibacy is not the problem. The problem is the culture that allowed this thing to reign. And by the way, in terms of the bishop enablers, I must mention one thing, Raymond, and that is the role of therapists. They always get a pass. The bishops listened to the therapists who thought they could fix anybody. That was the zeitgeist. That was the spirit of the times. We can take Father X and we can fix him. No, they overestimated their authority.
What about the explanation of opportunity or clericalism? We hear those explanations bandied about as well.
Well, the opportunity thesis says that the reason why boys were molested more than girls is because priests had access to altar boys. They've had access to girls now for decades. We haven't seen a sharp increase in the number of girls getting molested by priests. That argument simply doesn't work. Clericalism is what was an embarrassment as an argument in 2019 at the Vatican Summit. Almost everybody spoke about clericalism as a cause of sexual abuse. Look, clericalism can be used as an understanding as to why some bishops enabled that form of elitism. But no minor was ever abused because of clericalism. He was abused because of molestation, because of something else that was driving the molester. So clericalism is a dodge. At best, it addresses the enabling priest. It says absolutely nothing about the molesting priest because they don't want to talk about the subject of homosexuality. That's the great taboo.
Yeah, and I want to get into that because you probe that in this book, and it's an explosive claim to a lot of ears and a lot of people reading. But I want to start with this. While the church has been very clear in condemning abuse of minors, it seems to be awfully tolerant with clerics acting out with young men or women in some cases. Isn't that a problem, Bill?
Oh, it certainly is. And if you read the reports of the John Jay study on this, the two studies, both of them were done quite well. And you take a look at the work of so many different psychiatrists have looked at this. Virtually all of the molesters of minors were also having sex with other men. And that meant, in most cases, other men in the seminaries or in the priesthood. So you can't divorce one from the other. Yes, it's possible for you to be having sex with somebody of the same sex as an adult and not be a molester, but in too many cases it was. And if, in fact, the priests voluntarily take a vow of chastity, nobody asked them to do this, then why don't they enforce these norms? And there is a relaxation here, a much more permissive attitude toward that, when in fact they should treat it maybe not as a form of abuse, but clearly as a violation of their professed vows.
In part 2 of The Truth About Clerical Sexual Abuse, you go into great detail about what you believe to be the true origins of this abuse. The role of evil gets a chapter here, as does dissent in the church and dissidence. How has that combination facilitated this scandal, in your estimation?
I don't think most priests who molested were evil. I do think that they were sick men. I do reserve the category of evil for people like Maciel, who had sex with boys and girls and people of all different ages and fathered children illegitimately, and who on his own deathbed refused confession. That's a manifestation of evil. When you rape seminarians and you invite 5 men over knowing you have 3 beds in your apartment down in Seagirt in New Jersey, I'm talking about McCarrick, and you have sex with the men, you have violated them not only sexually, you have violated them in a very sacred way. These men are studying for the priesthood. That's the hand of the devil at work in there. Now, in terms of the dissidents, oh yeah, they certainly play a role. Look, I've read the reports, the self-reports of a lot of these sick men, people like Paul Shanley and many others. They will come right out and make it very, very clear that they took it as a green light, that these dissident professors in the seminaries were basically giving them rationalization. And even the John Jay researchers found the same thing. I'm not saying that I'll give you an example. There's back in the 1970s, you had two books by different authors with the same title, Human Sexuality. One by Crooks and Bauer. It's still taught in the seminaries. I mean, not in the seminaries. It's taught in the college and universities today. The other one by Anthony Kosnick. He was a priest. In both cases, they said we should not be judgmental about any sexual act. Kosnick even went so far as to say homosexuality, bestiality, they're all morally equal. You can't make any of these judgments. So this is being taught in the 1970s, the worst decade in the history of the Catholic Church in America, the 1970s. They were teaching these men not to make moral judgments about every form of sexual expression. Now, to the average, normal, healthy guy, if you hear this kind of nonsense, you're not going to go out and molest anybody. But what if you are somewhat disordered to begin with? What if you have some serious issues? And now you're hearing or you're reading through the National Catholic Reporter that we should be in rebellion against the Catholic Church's teachings on sexuality because it was the sexual ethics of the Church which caused the scandal. You're going to feel there's no problem. Remember what Shanley said. He said the same thing that Harry Hayes said, the founder of the gay movement in this country, and people like Larry Kramer, another gay activist. It's the kid who's the seducer. It's the kid who's the abuser. Don't blame me. The young kids have the problem, not me. And when you are in constant rebellion against the Church's teachings on marriage and sexuality, ordination, and celibacy, some guys who were inclined to act out, now they've gotten all the rationalizations they want.
Bill, you do bring out homosexuals and point to them as part and parcel of this sex abuse crisis. Now, your critics, some of whom I've read who've already seen this book, they say you're unfairly singling out one group. You're blaming them exclusively, equating homosexuality with abuse and abusers. Is that what you're doing here?
No, I've been saying for years that, well, most of the molesting priests were gay. Most gays are not molesters. I am saying this, and this I learned from the John Jay study. If you read what the priests themselves are saying, the molesting priests, it's the emotional and sexual immaturity which homosexuals have that accounts for the high incidence of abuse. And that was known by Freud. It was known by Jung. It's known by the molesting priests today. We're talking about psychosexual development. So many homosexuals as compared to heterosexuals have been stunted. They reached a level in their adolescence and it stops. They don't grow any further. And that's why they relate to youngsters. They relate to people who are adolescents. They're stuck in their adolescence. That doesn't mean that every homosexual is that way. I'm not saying homosexuality causes sexual abuse. In matter of fact, I pose the question and say it doesn't. But there is what they call in sociology intervening variables. If there is a disproportionate number of homosexuals who are involved in the sexual abuse of minors in and out of the church, and it's out of the church as well, then something must be driving it. And I am absolutely convinced it's the emotional and sexual immaturity which marks so many homosexuals that accounts for their deviant behavior with regard to minors.
Bill, I'm almost out of time. I have a minute. You have a doctorate in sociology. I mean, we just heard you cite letter and verse of this particular discipline. You've been covering this story from the beginning, crunching numbers, not only in the Catholic Church, but really across society. In writing the new book, what did you discover that surprised you? Did you learn anything new from the data and looking at it in this new light?
Well, I learned actually from the molesting priests how honest they were. I wasn't really up to date on that. So much of the material I've been gathering over many, many years. I knew, for example, that we've made great progress. We're down to single digits now of the average number of accusations made against the priest in any given year. The latest figure is six substantiated cases out of 50,000 members of the clergy. That's 99.9% of the priests with no accusation made against them. But I am very much concerned about the way the media have exploited this issue, the uneven table that they have on this. the fact that the role of homosexuality is taboo, so we're all supposed to zip it? No, we are called as Catholics to tell the truth, not to shade it.
Bill Donohue, thank you for being here. The Truth About Clergy Sexual Abuse, Clarifying the Facts and the Causes by Bill Donohue, published by Ignatius Press, is available at bookstores everywhere and online, including EWTN's catalog. Bill, thanks for the thought-provoking deep dive into this issue, and thanks for being here.
Thank you so much.
Congressman Smith is up next, but first, as many of you know, I am on the Spider Who Saved Christmas book tour. We had an incredible kickoff in Tampa last weekend. I want to thank everybody who came out. This Monday, November 22nd, I'm in Mesa, Arizona. In the coming weeks, I'll be in the Villages, Dallas, New Orleans, and Houston. I hope you'll come out and see me. We'll share some stories, talk about the book, and sign your copies of it. They make fantastic Christmas gifts. You can go to RaymondArroyo.com for all the dates and the locations, and we'll see you Monday in Mesa. House Democrats are trying once again to pass their nearly $2 trillion social spending bill known as the Build Back Better plan amid the highest inflation rates in 3 decades. But what's in the bill? And President Biden met virtually with China's President Xi on Monday. Joining us to discuss this and much more, senior member of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs, New Jersey Congressman Chris Smith. Congressman, thank you for being here. I want to start with the infrastructure bill. You were one of the 13 Republicans who voted for that bill. I know you voted for that because you felt you needed to rebuild the infrastructure in your district, which is crumbling. But the bill actually gives the feds more power to decide where that money goes. Do you have any concerns about that?
Well, Raymond, that's always the case. As a matter of fact, there's $550 billion that's new. The rest of it is the reauthorization of existing programs. And those formulas and that money is usually done, hopefully fairly, in a way that goes to the greatest need. And that's what I will be doing now for the next 5 years, because it is a 5-year plan, to make sure that what needs to be targeted with those funding funds gets it.
How do you feel about a guy like our former New Orleans Mayor Mitch Landrieu being named infrastructure czar? I mean, he spent millions taking down statues here in New Orleans while we had potholes everywhere and the streets are constantly flooded because of his mismanagement of the Sewage and Water Board.
Well, the good thing is that usually the staff that is institutional, the people who actually do the real work, and not the czar and others who are good for photo ops, that they'll get it right based on need. I was a little surprised at that as well. There are a lot of people in the Biden administration that just, are not up to the task, but that professional staff hopefully will do the right thing. And that's what we have to do as congressmen, oversight.
Let's talk about this upcoming Build Back Better Act that the White House has been touting now for months. This is a massive measure, spending bill that contains universal pre-K, electric vehicle tax credits, paid leave. Why is there no support in the GOP for this bill?
Well, frankly, you said it. It's advertised at $2 trillion. The Chamber of Commerce says it's at least $4 trillion and maybe more. Yep. So there's all kinds of gimmicks. It may even go higher. We don't know that. But it's at least $4.1 trillion at a time when our deficit is exploding, and the case for those programs have not been made. It is also the most pro-abortion piece of legislation that I've seen in years, because it has all of these programs, reinsurance programs, health programs, and of course an expansion of Obamacare without the Hyde Amendment, which means more abortion payments. The Catholic Conference put out a very strong letter, as did Susan B. Anthony and National Right to Life and others, saying this is absolutely unacceptable. There are 25 states that voted themselves to say we don't want to pay for any abortions, and that half of those by 2024 will be overturned explicitly in this legislation, if it becomes law, to pay for abortion on demand in their states. Talk about states' rights being violated, but above all, the rights of an unborn child to exist, to grow and thrive, cut short by government funding that's used to effectuate their demise.
Wow. Most people are not talking about those aspects of the bill.
No, they're not.
Congressman,
And Raymond, I can't say it enough. The money, it is overwhelmingly filled with money for abortion. There's spigot after spigot after spigot that will fund abortion on demand. They're not talking about it. We are, and the pro-life groups are. Thankfully, the Catholic Conference is speaking out very, very loudly. There was a letter signed by
Here's
6
my question.
leaders. Yes.
My question is Joe Manchin listening to you all? Because he's really
Yes,
the buck where the buck will stop.
It's a great question. He is very well aware of the huge abortion expansion provisions. And again, you know, Cardinal Dolan, Archbishop Naumann, and others, 6 in all, signed a very strong letter. And even when you mentioned the pre-K against the bill, when you mentioned pre-K, there's language in there that will preclude Catholic early education from being funded. Again, here we go again, discriminating against the Catholics in one of these and other people of faith in these bills. And I will be voting decidedly no and speaking out against it.
On ABC this week, Brian Dees, who's the director of the National Economic Council, had this to say when asked about rising inflation and the discontent with the current economy. Listen.
Well, inflation is high, and it's affecting Americans in their pocketbook and their outlook. But that concern actually underscores why it's so important to move forward on the Build Back Better bill that Congress is considering. And this is important. Far from adding to inflation concerns, this bill will do the opposite. Because it's fully paid for.
Congressman Smith, is this bill fully paid for?
It's not fully paid for, and it has a huge increase in taxes, including on corporations. So that's a serious problem. But all of this spending, when it's not really targeted the way the infrastructure bill was targeted, all of this spending leads to inflation. I mean, let's not forget, the Biden administration got an almost $2 trillion CARES package, so-called, for the, you know, I understood it during the Trump years because it was paying for programs to keep people from going belly up in terms of their businesses. That's not the case now. So they have, and I even, when I spoke out against the extending the national debt authorization, that there were $800 billion as of the end of August that had been unspent and unobligated, 1.3 trillion unspent and unobligated. But all this money just sitting in a pot somewhere, and now they're going to put more money into the Build Back Better so-called legislation. It is a very, very bad bill. It will absolutely increase inflation, and people are being hit right between the eyes, particularly those on a fixed income and those, you know, in the middle class wage earners. Why would we want to do that? And you remember, Yellen and all the others were saying all those times on the TV that don't worry, it's a short-term thing. It's not a short-term thing.
Congress and the White House, Congressman Smith, have poured $1.9 trillion in new spending into this economy as of March, after about $4 trillion in COVID relief in 2020. Yet American purchasing power has declined. The average standard of living has fallen. When you factor in the gas prices, I don't see how any of this tames inflation. I want to play something here for you. This is Joe Manchin, who says he will not support the bill in its current form. Earlier this month, he had this to say.
I will not support a reconciliation package that expands social programs and irresponsibly adds to our $29 trillion in national debt that no one seems to really care about or even talk about. Nor will I support a package that risks hurting American families suffering from historic inflation.
What do you make of Manchin's assessment, Congressman Smith? And is this bill riddled with budget gimmicks, as Senator Manchin contends?
Yes, he's right on every aspect that he has said, and he is very pro-life, so we're counting on him not to allow this bill to go forward with 50+1 votes, and that's what why they're using reconciliation. The filibuster does not apply here, but he's absolutely right. This is a monstrosity of legislation that will hurt the economy, and of course, it will kill unborn children.
Yeah. One of the budget gimmicks in the bill, and I just read about this, is it has money allocated for a child tax credit for illegal immigrants. It would end the requirement for a valid Social Security number, extending the child credit to undocumented families, covering approximately 675,000 children. This means that for a family with 3 children, the fully refundable $10,800 child tax credit payment would exceed the entire average income of several South and Central American countries. We already have a crisis on the border. Doesn't this incentivize more people to come here illegally should this bill pass?
No doubt about it. This incentivizes, this becomes an additional magnet. Not building the wall certainly created a magnet. That wall should be up. And let me remind everyone that in 2006, the Secure Fence Act passed the House of Representatives, the Senate was signed into law. People like Chuck Schumer and Hillary Clinton all voted for it. And the goal was to do exactly what Trump wanted to do, and that is to build a wall that would mitigate this violation of our boundaries. This provision in the legislation is another example of why this is an egregiously flawed piece of legislation. Added to that, the budget gimmicks you mentioned, the way that they're advertising it at $1.75 trillion when it's really $4 trillion, one of the main budget gimmicks is to have sunset provisions that will not be followed. So a huge spending program begins and then ends 2 years later. Good luck. Or a year later, it will be extended. So, this is supposed to be over a 10-year period. Well, over a 10-year period, these things will be reauthorized. It could be changed potentially by a future president. But, in the short term, we have Biden for at least 3 years
well,
or so more.
Government never scales down. Whether it's Republicans or Democrats in power, government never shrinks itself. It's a self-defeating proposition.
Very true.
Before I run out of time, I've got literally 1 minute. The Vatican ambassador, Archbishop Christophe Pierre, made a statement to the U.S. bishops this week. He said we need a synodal approach when it comes to abortion, and that means looking closer at the reasons women abort their children and providing services to expectant mothers. Your reaction to those comments?
Well, my wife and I have been in the pro-life movement for almost 50 years each, and I have been just inspired by how the Catholic Church, how the pro-life movement, the organizations, pregnancy care centers, and outreach to women like Project Rachel, who have had abortions, and help them find reconciliation and a pathway towards peace and wholeness. It is the pro-life movement that does that, and the Catholic Church and other churches. It's already being done. Meeting that need, is what the pregnancy care centers are all about. If a woman is unattendedly pregnant, they're there saying, we love you both and we will help you. So for him to admonish that kind of outreach, it's already being done. We also need to stop the funding. He ought to speak out, and the Pope needs to speak out against what Biden is doing on getting rid of the Hyde Amendment and every other pro-life law, including conscience rights. He wants to get rid of the ability, he's certainly not enforcing the law, the Weldon Amendment and the others that are already in effect, to say clearly and unambiguously, you cannot be coerced into performing or assisting in an abortion. And that goes for Catholic hospitals and everyone else.
Great points. Congressman Chris Smith, thank you for being here. Thank you for your time. We'll check in with you soon.
Thank you very much, Raymond. Thanks for having me on.
That is all the time we have for now. Be sure to catch us next week. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo. Bye now.